Okay, so started the recording, and I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll be talking about workplace threat assessments and security measures in the context of domestic violence spilling over into the workplace. This is brought to you by Peace at Work and the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and we're here to support and help you in any way that we can. If any of you all are in the Dixieland state, there is a economic justice program summit conference being offered this Thursday in Montgomery by the coalition. So I encourage you, if you're in the South, to come to Montgomery on Thursday for our economic justice event. I'll be there speaking as well. All right, moving on. I got my phone going off. Just a little housekeeping. It's going to be roughly 3/4 of an hour. Q&A or questions and answers throughout, although I'll certainly pause at the end to allow you all to have any other questions. But I'm fine with sort of interruptions or questions as we go through. So feel free to contact me or to ask questions along the way. And you could do that if you see there's a little questions thing right there. You could pop in it. And if anything other problems, like you have trouble with my audio or anything at all, just communicate with me through there. You should have gotten the handouts. I might have been a little late adding the handouts before they got sent. I apologize if that's true, but I certainly added it to the after webinar email. So you'll get the handouts, this presentation, and the recording, a link to the recording in the after email program. Okay, a little bit about myself. I run an organization called ePanic Button, and I'll do a little demo of that at the end. And I also run Peace at Work, focusing on consultation, research, training, speaking engagement, stuff like that. And we have a new tool called the Threat Assessment Tool, and I'll demonstrate that as well. I've done quite a bit around domestic violence in the workplace. In fact, when I was the workplace violence specialist for the state of North Carolina, it was really one of my primary tasks to introduce the domestic violence concerns into our workplace violence policies for all the state agencies and universities in the Tar Heel state. And I have a lot of experience from working with a public health research institute in Chapel Hill, looking at violence prevention from a public health perspective. And of course, I did a lot of my direct experience with the Asheville Police Department. Contact me anytime. And I'm also very active in LinkedIn if you want to continue any conversations there. I sure welcome and encourage that. Okay, a little bit more just broadly, just want to say it's a 1-hour webinar. I am going to be talking about security measures and threat assessment, maybe even a couple of legal issues, but just take it for what it is. I'm going to try to provide you with much resources, but if you're having a real case, if you have a real situation, please get more data, get more support, do more trainings. This is just supposed to supplement or introduce the issues. It's a much bigger issue to address a real situation, so I hope you get that support. And I'll also be demonstrating a little bit our new threat assessment tool. In no way is that a pitch or anyway. I'm just showing you a way to organize. However you do that on a scratch paper or on a whiteboard, it's really important to be able to organize your data so you could make a larger view. Okay, I just did a bunch of cases that I wanted to illustrate how common this is. It was just the past month, not even that. Just within this month of September, I just rattled off a few cases around the United States of homicides. The one case that I followed pretty close to is near where I used to live in North Carolina, where a man came in and shot 8 people. Now, of course, we hear about this tragedy of what happened in the Naval Yard, and people, and sometimes I think it's kind of specious to say, oh, well, these cases are more dangerous because 13 people killed here. It really comes down to, how many shots were fired, who survived, who didn't get hit. He certainly could have killed more people. Yesterday, they could have killed less. In many of the cases, you're looking at the intention of the perpetrator, how much ammo they had, how much capability they had, how many weapons, and so that's really the biggest issue. It comes down to almost a luck factor of how many people actually die. I know a lot of people may disagree with that, but we could discuss active shooter response in another time. All right, let's get into threat assessment. A couple of points. I just want to emphasize a few things. When we're talking about threat assessments, by no means, and this is Johnny's own humble opinion, it's not an exact science. I don't believe any system could ever guarantee the 100% accuracy about human behavior. What we're trying to do is really look at broad issues like high risk, low risk, try to get a general sense of the chance for and severity of a shooting, and then appropriately adjust your security measures. It's a guessing game in some sense. Yes, there is science behind it. There are peer-reviewed studies and control group study, double-blind control studies that are stated to have been done on some threat assessment tools, but still it's not conclusive about any of these interventions. The other factor I want to mention about threat assessment is that it's not a linear process. It's not like, okay, I gathered my data, I did my interviews, I crunched all the numbers, and then here's a figure, here's a rating of how dangerous it is. Threat assessments need to be fluid due to the dynamic nature of the situation. She could have gone back to the abuser or just broke up with him. He could have just found out about something. He could have just lost his job. And then even actions that you take have an influence. If you get a restraining order against him, if he's charged with any criminal activity, all these different things could greatly swing the risk in either direction. And it's not just about the abuser. There could be environmental factors and also the behavior of the target that need to be considered as well. So please understand how, in a sense, volatile these threat assessments can be done. Now, when we talk about domestic violence in the workplace or in school, as opposed to, let's say, an ex-employee or some stranger stalker, some things that are unique about working in domestic violence cases is that you do have this, I'm assuming, by the way, when I talk about this, I'm assuming that we have an employee who's a victim of abuse. It may not come into the radar where we have the abuser as the employee and the victim, lives at home or isn't associated with the organization. I'm assuming in most of these cases the target is affiliated with the organization. Now with that, it means that you've got great communication opportunities and some challenges with the target. You've got a wealth of information, and so a lot of your information, a lot of your activities is surrounded the target. Now, regarding that, there's some different views saying, we've made this so much responsibilities on the target and on the employer. There's different views or approach is saying we need to put more responsibility, more impact on the abusers, on the subjects themselves, make them dance instead of responding to them. And there's some great points about that. And that really applies more with especially the judicial approach about how court systems, law enforcement, and advocates work and manage the abuser, making them more accountable for their behavior. But employers often don't have that opportunity unless, of course, the abuser is also an employee. I talked about this before, just earlier. I just want to emphasize that there's even a greater emphasis within domestic violence issues that the situations could be really dynamic, capricious. No, I don't know if that's the right word. Victims and abusers, there's often dynamics whereas the abuser may feel bad. I think something's called the honeymoon period after the abusive situation makes up with them, and so that there might be a peak of violence and threats and concerns, but then it could subside, and so it may appear that the threat is gone. Most of our experience shows that at some point that there'll be a rise in the violence again, especially if the person was never held accountable. It's more likely that the abuse will come more frequently and more severely. So again, I'm trying to emphasize that these things can ebb and flow, and you have to maybe expect that as a security director or someone involved with the threat assessment process. The final point I want to make is, as opposed to the other types of workplace violence, like coworkers or clients, even let's look at the Naval Yard shooting. Let's look at these really big, horrible, nationally recognized incidents like the school shooting in Connecticut or the Aurora theater shooting. The targets themselves, the location where it occurred, had very, very little, if any, warning or knowledge of the pending concern or threat. That's really a different picture compared to domestic abuse situations where the victims are intimately aware of their threat. They know that they're in danger, and as bad as that is, there's benefit in that because they could forewarn and they could tell the employer and those stakeholders about the situation. So I just want to emphasize that often victims, their tires are being slashed, the gun's put to their head, they have death threat letters, and that sounds all horrible, but these are clear indicators that there's a risk, as opposed to the other incidents that we've looked at where the targets really did not see it coming. Here's a couple points about what I thought we'd go over. I want to just skip over this because I want to move into the issues. Broadly, when we talk about the threat assessment process, it may be there's some sort of incident that occurs. Maybe he showed up and made a threat or made a scene, or maybe it's the incident could be involved with the employee's job performance issues, showing up late. There could be no interaction or activity by the abuser, but it's more about the victim's behavior at work that's raised the red flag. By the way, I'm going to take a quick break here and just emphasize this issue that I keep saying he and she. The vast majority of domestic violence cases are male perpetrators against female victims. Yes, it does happen that females are abusive to males, but especially when we're talking about physical violence and homicide, it's something, I'm going to throw a rough number on 95% of males assaulting females. And then, of course, there's the subject of homosexual relationships as well, where, there's an added layer of secrecy or non-disclosure due to the, the discrimination against homosexual relationships. So that being said, I'm going to say he and she a lot, referring to the abuser and victim. Well, what happens is there's hopefully some sort of report. The whole idea, and this is really the critical part of workplace violence prevention, is that somehow management is notified. There's a lot of reasons why management is not notified. But ideally, you've got some sort of investigation team, a threat assessment team to look at this, who are going to be doing interviews, gathering information, making decisions. And I don't have this, again, in a 1, 2, 3 steps. It's really more about individuals about this cyclical process where you might be doing some interviews, taking some action steps. You might immediately have some action steps such as hiring off-duty police officers. But when you do these action steps, again, there's going to be more information that's going to be a result of that. So it's got to be a continual assessment. That was just a brief overview. I'm going to go over this all in detail. Real briefly, depending upon the size of your organization, ideally you've got not just one person. It's not just securities or the HR managers. We're looking at a team approach, and I've listed a few typical players on these teams. I just want to emphasize, this stands for employee assistance professional, and then legal counsel, of course, is a major player in all of these, especially when it comes down to taking any legal measures like getting a restraining order or doing things like firing victims, stuff like that, or the abusers. I want to emphasize also that these are all internal to the organization. You could use outside parties as well, such as the victim advocacy organizations, law enforcement, or third-party security firms. Let's get down to what it's all about, what it really would look like. So if you're a member of a threat assessment team, how did you find out about it? I doubt that you physically witnessed a harass or a simple assault or the abuser keying the victim's car outside. So it may be that the victim comes to you directly, and victims comes. I think that's going to bug me. I got to correct that. It may be that they come to you directly and they seek for support. Very often this is in cases where it's at a real red danger zone where they overcome their shame and come forward and talk to you about those issues. Another study, and by the way, if you're all just joining us for this one event, we did 3 other programs earlier looking at statistics and warning signs and things like that. And one of those stats was looking at how many coworkers are aware of the abusive situations with their colleagues. It could be one of those situations where the victim is in so much trouble that they're messing up on their job and the colleague has to cover them, or it could be the situation where the abuser or the victims are friends with their colleagues, and the colleague, just as in a friend, associate, truly cares and wants to step forward and offer support. If it's job performance, it may be a supervisor who's initially doing some sort of a job performance evaluation and finds out about the abusive situation. It may be that the person goes to employee assistance and the employee assistants come to you, or maybe they go to occupational health and then the nurse reports it to you. Just be aware that there could be a range of areas where it comes in. The point that I want to emphasize, though, especially when it talks about the victim or the co-workers of the victims, is you have to understand there's a real resistance to reporting. And this, if I could emphasize how we can develop a good workplace violence policy, is how can you develop an environment where people feel comfortable coming forward, that they feel that management's actually going to do something. Victims are often terrified of the abuser, and they feel like if the employer takes certain actions against them or does anything, that the retaliation will be against the victims. So there has to be an emphasis that the employer will take action to support the victims, protect the victims, and will take it seriously. There's also issues around confidentiality, embarrassment, shame factors, so there's a real resistance to report. That's, of course, when we're thinking about the victims. The other thing I want to emphasize is with coworkers is that there's a real concern that management may want to get rid of the problem, so they'll fire the victim. There's a pretty interesting case going on out in California, I think in San Diego, where a teacher at a Catholic church was fired due to her abused status as a victim. And she's now suing the Catholic diocese for that termination. But just emphasize again, if people think, oh my goodness, victims are going to be fired, maybe I'm not going to tell management about it. I don't know how in a webinar that I could express how an organization is supposed to create an environment where people feel confident, secure, and trusting of their employers. That's really of a longer history about how you treat your employees and your basic character. I didn't know where to throw this in here, so I threw it in here. While we're talking about warning signs of victims and possible abusers, we look at the threat assessment focus zeroing in on the individuals, but broadly, looking at the threat, like someone's being abused or someone's acting abusive. But there's one incident where I've been looking at a number of cases lately, and I posted this in a blog recently. Let me just go run to that blog post. What we see is the number of incidents where affairs lead to an assault. So I think I've got that right here. There's a number of incidents where there's an office affair going on, and there's no threat, there's no danger, but the abuser finds out about it, goes to the workplace, and he'll either kill the boyfriend or both of them or everyone involved, or even just anyone that he finds there. But in these incidents, one horrible, yes, it was this incident, a woman just disclosed to her husband, let me go to that case, goes to, tells her husband about an affair she's having. They have a big fight, as you can imagine, and then she goes to work the next day, tells the receptionist, if my husband, this guy right here, shows up, well, actually I'm not sure if that's him or not, yep, that's him, tells, if my husband shows up, don't let him in. Well, he shows up, she says, sir, you can't go in. He just walks right past her, finds her, and shoots her, and then kills himself. So again, what I'm trying to beat into the ground is there may be no threats, concerns, job performance issues, but just the fact that you may hear about an extramarital affair going on, that could be an issue. And again, it could be the other party, the other woman, the other man, that could be the target. So, I'm sure that person's not coming forward to manager telling them about their affair with the married lady across the hallway. Again, this is a larger issue, again, about reporting and awareness of what's going on in your organization. Moving on. when we're doing a threat assessment, what we're really doing is gathering as much info and then processing it in a way to keep it organized. The type of data we're getting is broadly brought in by two factors. One is talking, like interviewing. So you're talking to maybe the abuser, or of course you're going to be talking with the target, the victim of the abuse. But there might be witnesses involved as well. Maybe you're going to be talking to, I'm just stretching it here, but previous partners of the abuser, things like that. The professionals who are involved in the case, you'll be interviewing them as well, gathering information. The other thing we're going to be doing is getting data. It's a little bit easier and faster to obtain, but what we're talking about is, especially if the abuser is also an employee, you can look at pulling the personnel records. We can do background checks, but please understand when we're talking about criminal background checks, you really want recent and local ones. These $20 national background checks really are far from complete and often inaccurate. So find out what county the person lives in, what state. It may depend upon where you live. For instance, in Louisiana, the different parishes have different records. So get probably the statewide record and what is most recent. Now, there's also things like what won't show up are restraining orders or other issues such as liens against their house or divorce proceedings, which will be found in the civil records, which probably won't show up if you do your standard criminal background checks. Other things you can do are get the police reports. Someone could, for that person's workplace or their home. So go to the police department in the jurisdiction where they live and then see what kind of reports were made for that house. The police could have been called to that house 5 times in the past 6 months, but because no charges were made, that's not going to show up in the criminal background. Financial records are harder to obtain, regarding confidentiality and records rights issues, but anything that's be able to found out, like civil liens against them, they're going through bankruptcy, that could be found out in the courthouse. I'm very big on internet searches in terms of social media. That's an entirely other webinar, but it's especially, well, I'm going to say this for all folks, I don't think it's a generational thing anymore. People post what they'll do online. There's factors, if you generally know like their Facebook with their name, you could look them up and find out all about them, but often they'll have a fake account, like they'll make up some alias and then that's how they're posting. So there's different ways to obtain information about their alias, where they're posting, and it's pretty surprising what people will post on there. By the way, going back to the affair things, I just thought of another case where a woman is posting pictures of herself with another guy. The guy sees this, he gets jealous, and he goes to the workplace and assaults that man in the photo, because where it all stems from a Facebook posting where we see jealousy rearing its ugly head. And then, of course, there's always getting a professional to do this as well, gathering all this data. Now, when we're talking about information, your best source of information is going to be the victims themselves. One thing I've heard is that, and know from experience, is that victims are the experts in surviving this abuser. So they know what the triggers are. They know what would set them off, and they know everything, about them, because they make it their mission to survive in life, to be aware of these danger signs. So talk with them. The only challenge I want to put out there is it's sort of I don't want to say double-edged sword. It's sort of a challenge sometimes, because while the victims may know the most about the abuser, they are the least impartial in this view. And I mean that in almost in different ways, meaning because they're so closely aligned with it, they've got mixed feelings. They may still love the abuser as well. That's a factor. They're concerned about their children. They maybe minimizing the risk, because that's a psychological defense, that they want to not believe how in danger they are. We all do this throughout our days. When you're driving down the highway, you can't think about the guy veering off and slamming into your car. You just think about making sure your car is going straight. And so there's this tendency to minimize that risk, because it just helps you get through the day. On the other side, it could be that they could be traumatized. They could be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They could have severe cases of anxiety, which is, of course, when we're talking about, I'm not saying that they're quote-unquote crazy. I'm saying they're not that impartial, objective observer that you think of your classic investigator scientific review kind of perspective has. So it's very important about the way that you're working with those victims. It's really critical when you're doing these issues to do it in a sensitive way, in a way that ensures their confidentiality, and also gives them a sense of autonomy. There's a real challenge sometimes for employers to step in to say, okay, this is what's got to be done. You've got to get a restraining order. This can come down from the big corporate, legal risk management perspective of trying to protect their liability and their deciding what's best. On the other side, I've seen this exact same thing happen in small mom and pop operations where we have an employer who genuinely, paternally that feels this sense of protection towards the victim and wants to do so much for them. What I'm talking about is making decisions for the victims, such as asking the victims to leave or press charges. You have to be aware of the impact of that on their safety and also about their sense of autonomy. Now, one thing I want to be cautious with is when you're working with them, it could get very frustrating, especially if they end up returning to the abuser. And, maybe some people have a difference of opinion with me about that and want to argue. I welcome any input. But please understand it's not uncommon for victims to make up with the abuser and then the cycle begins all over again. I heard this one stat, I don't know where it came from, but victims may leave the abuser up to 7 times so before they finally leave. Now that could be pretty frustrating to an HR manager or a security director continually opening up this file and saying, oh, here we go again, doing this threat assessment and implementing these security measures, especially if they end up costing money. So just be aware of these issues. Now I'm not trying to be nice and saying we need to support them. It's not a matter of being nice. It's about maintaining an open door, non-judgmental stance so that they feel like they can come forward. You can just imagine if you spent a lot of time support helping someone leave and then they return, you can naturally understand why they may not tell you why they returned. And then if it gets abusive again, do you think that they'll go back to you and talk with you about the new emerging issues if they feel like you're fed up with them or disgusted with the way they've been handling it? It's not about being nice. It's about getting them to trust you to come forward to talk to you. So broadly, when we're doing the assessment, I'm just going to touch on a few red flags here. Naturally, we want to look at the history of violence of the abuser. And that you can find out maybe through background checks. Although those criminal charges, the guy could be a very violent person and just never got caught. Again, looking at previous restraining orders, previous abusive relationships. One factor, and I'll demonstrate this a little bit, is that have they themselves been victims of violence? There's been some interesting studies regarding that. The one thing that I want to mention, though, is that if you find that it's empty and they appear to be great guys and there's no history, that one dynamic that we found in domestic violence situations is that sometimes the abusers are really only violent in the relationship. I think I mentioned this before. Joe, your neighbor's a great guy at the neighborhood barbecue. He's funny. He's always goofing off and seems like a nice guy. They could be a very different relationship within behind their closed doors. When we look at their personality and overall traits, this is generally true, I believe, for all sort of rampage shooter types, but it comes down to issues of power control. Do they blame others? They often talk about a external locus of control or internal locus of control. If they feel like all the control is outside of them, they don't like that and they want to maintain as much control that they have. If anything goes bad, they blame others. Other issues that we want to see, we know that the relationship might be on the rocks or breaking up, but their chance of being more volatile, especially when we see so many of these murder-suicides. Do we see a sense of hopelessness? Suicidal ideation certainly is another risk factor. One simple thing that I often want to find out pretty quickly in any sort of threat assessment is their capability to carry out threats, especially if they've made detailed threats about how they will do it and they mention weapons. You want to be aware of that. Now, I'm down here in the South, surrounded by guns. guns in themselves are not an issue. What the concern sometimes is when we look at it for its killing capacity, especially more the martial sort of aspects, not just deer rifles, but fascination with assault weapons. I know a lot of people with assault weapons too, and I'm not saying that they're dangerous, but when you add that in context of threats, abusive behavior, history of violence, then it is a concern. Certainly we want to look at mental health issues and substance abuse factors as well. The challenges here, though, is often regarding the confidentiality of this information. If you are talking about an employee who has substance abuse or diagnosis, you got to think about it as a threat assessment team. You're now privy, just been now have information about someone's personal private healthcare information, and there's HIPAA regulations regarding that. I guess it's the DSM-5 now, isn't it? Did they publish it? I'm not sure. We want to be looking at other diagnoses that possibly could be leading to that sort of violent tendencies. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but here's just a few things that have been listed, identified as concerns. I talked about this before. If you're getting this information, be careful, talk to your legal counsel. I'm not an attorney, but be aware of the information you're handling as well. Now, one of the things is if it's occupational health or employee assistance, there may be a duty to warn if they feel that there's a real threat. That might override the confidentiality requirements. Where I get confused is, what do you do when you find out from an associate, yes, this individual has been diagnosed, or I found out, I'll give a case where I'll show in a little bit, where a man was sexually assaulted by his mother. How do they know this information? It's valid. I would sure want to know, but how do you verify it? And if you do, is that private healthcare information? I'm not sure. Another factor that I look as a risk factor is their personal support network. Here you just read this postcard. This is from postsecret.com. For those individuals who lose a sense of who don't have, or they lose their personal support network, that puts them at greater risk. Now, in a domestic violence situation, it could be that the guy's whole identity is surrounded by having this woman as his wife, and that's who he identifies. He sees him as a strong, attractive man, and a woman would never leave him. If she leaves him, that's not just it's not about, oh, my love for you is I'm going to pine for you, but it's really about their ego being destroyed, their sense of identity, because they believe that they need to maintain that control. So again, it's not just certainly the big risk factors that they leave, but the other one is what other support mechanisms do they have in their life. This leads me to my big red flags. While all of these, when we talk about these issues, we can look at the broad context of these different factors. There's just three things that I really want to emphasize that are real red flags. Like, this is where the shooting may happen. The one factor we need to know about is, has the victim left the abuser? Again, another stat that I don't know where it comes from, something like 75% of the victims who are killed leave at the point of leaving, like right around at the time when they've ended the relationship, the homicide occurred. So this comes back to the victim telling management, yes, I've moved out, I've ended the relationship, I just called him and told him we're through, I just sent him a text and said we're through, whatever it might be. This is real personal sort of stuff, and you're thinking, why would anyone go and tell their boss this? But this is an important issue in these domestic violence scenarios. Other factors, you want to look at court cases, because often these incidents surround things like divorce, child custody, and restraining orders. You really have to look at these court cases as turning points. If she gets the restraining order and he's given the notice, and then there's you get the ex parte, and then often like 10 days later you go to the courthouse and you testify in front of the judge. It may be that morning that he goes and commits the act, or he doesn't really believe she's ever going to divorce him until finally happens in the courthouse. It's the I don't know what they sign, a piece of paper, they put a stamp on something, but when that is finalized, they go, well, she did it, she finally left me, and then they're going to quote unquote take justice into their own hands. While we've all been in relationships, go up and down, break off, get back together. if she leaves, he may be thinking that, well, she's going to come back because maybe that's some of the history. But one of the greatest fears, a prime motivator for violence in these domestic cases is jealousy. So if she starts again with a new relationship, that certainly is absolutely a red flag. So just as the case that I was covering before the webinar started, where the guy just found out about this affair that she's having, if there's any new relationships, discovery of new relationships, perceived or not, that could be another big red flag for an assault to occur. Okay, so we have all these threat assessment things. What we want to do is organize and review that data. One thing I find is sort of like try to imagine a desk with all these folders and a computer with all these different files on the desktop where we got this tidbit of this video and here's testimony from this person, here's a police report, and how do you organize all this so you can look at the larger picture? And then when you organize this, it comes down to really a personal interpretation. Guns are a great example. If I told you I know this guy who's got 14 rifles in his closet, some people, I can imagine members of my family being, shocked and scared and, oh, we can't go to that place and don't turn your back on that crazy guy. Who carries an arsenal like that? But then in other cultures, other realms, this scene is quite normal. And the case I'm thinking of, the individual is completely harmless. He's a good man, and I have no concerns at all about this person. But it comes down to, again, the interpretation of these issues. What the emphasis I want to put regarding all that is to put it in context with all the other issues. Now, I talked before about a threat assessment team, and that's the idea that you have a group of people coming together. That means different opinions coming together with different points of view. It's not just cultural issues like about whether guns are bad or not. It comes down to your professional training. HR is going to have a very specific view of how it should be handled. Security, maybe coming from law enforcement or from a military background, they're going to have their perspective. A therapist is going to have their perspective on how to approach it. And that's really the best thing. They might be different, but that's, I believe, the makings of a good team is that a team that can work together, presenting different points. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a guessing game, folks, we're talking about. Now, if I may, I want to take a quick break here. I got about 20 minutes left. I want to introduce to you a new tool, if I may. And I'm not trying to pitch anything to you folks, but whether you apply this to a whiteboard or a scrap piece of paper, I just want to introduce you to this case. Actually, let me skip back to the incident. Boom, boom, boom. I want to talk to you about Joe Ferguson. He was a young man who killed 8 people in and around Sacramento just before 9/11, and he was going out with an employee. He was a supervisor at a security firm. Girlfriend broke up with him. He hacked up her car with an axe and then was put on administrative leave. This during, this administrative leave that he returned with a gun and killed a number of folks. So I just want to demonstrate this case. I probably timed out here, so I'm going to have to log back in. And sorry about this. All right, so I'm going to look at this one case with Joe Ferguson. What you want to do is you want to look at all these different factors. So he was sexually abused by his mother, and it was a pretty horrible situation. She was in jail, and due to that abuse, certainly had a skewed view of relationships in his life. We know that he hacked up her car as the initial issue, and we know that his target was his victim, Nina Susu. So we can look at that axe attack, and I'm going to, one idea is just how do you level these? You could put them into different piles or whatever you want to do, but organize these issues. He also had a fair number of weapons in his arsenal as well, and what we want to do is look at that and consider, the danger of that, not the fact that he has AK-47s with hollow point rounds, but the fact that he hacked up her car with an axe, that he's been sexually abused. And I can throw in a lot more grievances in these as well. In his relationships with his father, he was fascinated with Nazi stuff. A coworker told them, oh, by the way, with all this information you're doing, you've got to find a way of organizing this to collect all this data in one central place and keep it secure and confidential as well. So he calls his father, and this is all true, Air Commander, and he both were I'm going to spell fascinated wrong. Fascinated with Nazi. I'm going to spell memorabilia wrong. Memorabilia. And I'm going to put that under relationship. So, I mean, I'm not saying everyone who's fascinated with the Nazi stuff and collects swastikas and SS daggers is all evil, but I mean, some people may think that, but that just gives you a bigger picture about where things are with this individual. The point is, find a way of gathering all this data, putting it in one spot so you can look at this quickly, overview, and determine the risk so you can take some action steps. And that's where, with the remaining time, I'm going to emphasize. Oh, real quick. I just touched briefly on threat assessment principles. In the slides, you can find more resources. I've got the URLs for more information there. There's also systems, other programs that you could use to input your data and then get more information out. There's the Mosaic program by Gavin DeBecker, and then John Burns has the Center for Aggression Management, and they have their tool. I'm not making these are not recommendations. I'm just aware of these things. You can go and research them, try them out for yourself. In terms of getting support, I do suggest the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals and ASIS to find that help. Okay, what are we going to do to protect the workplace? Broadly, we want to develop a response plan if a person shows up. Now, the Boca Raton incident where the receptionist is told, oh, don't let my husband in, I'm not going to do, I guess it's ugly to do armchair quarterback stuff, but, that receptionist was not prepared for that arrival. So we need to have a better plan in place. We can make the workplace more secure, and we can make the victims more secure. In order to look at these threat assessments or risk security measures, I want to point towards a study I did looking at 500 cases of workplace assaults, domestic assaults at work. So these are all cases of ex-husbands looking for or ex-boyfriends looking for their partners, and a couple women looking for their men as well. You all can have access to this study if you'd like. It's on my website. And when we look at this, when we're talking about doing background checks, we found that a large number of them, it was unknown, and I could do more research to get that. But what we did find was a large number of them had previous domestic violence assault issues. Also, the factor was that there was, in a fair number of cases, some sort of warning. By warning, I mean the victims told them, hey, I'm being stalked, I'm harassed, I'm in danger. Or the guy, by previous incident, I mean the guy showed up, slashed tires, threw a brick through the window, stalking and harassing behavior. So there are warning signs. There are some pre-indicator behaviors that we need to take seriously. Again, we talked about background checks. There's getting restraining orders. In many cases, it was unknown, but in a fair number of the cases, yes, there was a previous restraining order in place. If you happen to know that there is a restraining order, obtain a copy for security or the front desk so that they could have that ready for law enforcement when the person shows up. The one point I want to emphasize, it's really a bad idea for employers ever to make their victims get a restraining order. Never make it a point of employment that they obtain the personal restraining orders. In types of the relationships, this is showing whether they were married, they were quote-unquote dating, or they were separated or divorced. It just shows you that figure that I just found that I got to find out what that means, like if this isn't a relationship. One factor when we look at homicide, this is not regarding workplace violence, but domestic homicides in general. In terms of femicide, when they look at these lethality reviews of partners killing a woman, one factor they found was that the level of sexual intimacy between them. If they just dated or there's some casual acquaintance situations, that there was a risk factor there. But one thing that they found, if there was sexual intercourse, if they've been physically intimately together, that was a higher risk for there to be a homicide later. So maybe the sense of the deeper relationship that goes on there. One question is, were they co-workers? In many of all these instances, it was rare. But one thing I want to emphasize is that if they are co-workers, there's a much greater risk of lethality or liability, not lethality, but liability for the employer. Employers are much more responsible for their employees' actions, as opposed, and this is my humble opinion, as opposed to the victim's safety in themselves. So a victim gets hurt at work, well, that's bad. You got some, negligent security issues. However, if your employee committed the act, we have negligent retention, negligent hiring, negligent supervision issues, and that's where we've seen more lawsuits. How many were killed? In large number of them, it was just a quote-unquote just the victim of the abuse who was targeted. And when it says 0, that means there was an injury that occurred, no death that occurred. And then in number of injured issues, we've got those listed there as well. Now this relates to the question about who gets hurt. So aside from the victim of abuse, we do find in the vast majority of the cases, they were the only ones who were assaulted, but we do see others being hurt as well, the most common being co-workers, colleagues being hurt, as opposed to the customer or a supervisor. By other, these are often law enforcement. Law enforcement was hurt in that. Now, what this means is whether you're a supervisor or a colleague, when you're involved personally in helping the abusers get out of the situation, let me go back. So, while most of the time the co-workers will not be hurt, one thing that is a risk factor that increase the chance of you being hurt is if the abuser, if the co-workers or the supervisors, employers actively support the person. Now, I don't mean like giving time off and like making accommodations at job. I mean like moving them, lending them money, helping them out, letting them stay at your place, picking them up, dropping them off. If you're physically involved with helping them leave the situation, the abuser may find out. Again, when we talk about the cyclical nature of the abuse, and when they get back together, the guy's going to find out, oh, who told you about this? And who did you talk to when you were away? And where did you stay? And what did they tell you? And they're going to find out who was making her leave him, and you're going to get on their list as well. The one factor I want to emphasize very importantly is males. Again, when we're talking about male abusers, female victims, that there's a huge jealousy factor that's put into play. As a man, if you're supporting that woman, whether you're in an intimate relationship or not, there's going to be that perception. There was another recent case where a guy was helping a victim, escorting her back home. Now, there is questions like they were at a bar together, and he said, hey, let me take you home because I know your boyfriend's been stalking you. So he brought her back home after the bar closed. The guy is there at her home waiting. And of course, there's questions like, 2 o'clock in the morning, you bring a man home, what's the guy going to be thinking? I'm not blaming in any sense, but that really feeds into the victims or the perpetrator's sense of jealousy. There's also the points about escorting victims to their car. You have the guy, walking to her car, driving her home. Those are dangerous as well. The other thing I really want to emphasize is when and where. When we did know where it occurred, we found the parking lot over and over again was a freaking spot. For those of you who joined us earlier, I did cover for 3 out of 4 of those cases all involved the parking lot. Then what about when it occurred? Most likely when we knew when it occurred, it was most likely at the beginning of the shift where the person is, and then by beginning I mean within a half hour. If you start at 9, anywhere from 8:30 to 9:30, so within that slot. Very often though, it's before the shift begins where the person is waiting for them to arrive at work. If you're staying in a shelter, if you're hiding out, the one place they can find you is at work. So Monday morning, 9 a.m., I know where to find you, and that's where they're waiting. The other factor that we see in many of these cases is the abuser shows up, and there's sort of a scene, there's an argument. And unless you got your own private office, the one private spot you can go is let's go outside. Let's not air our dirty laundry here in front of everybody else in the lobby. They go outside. She finally says, it's over, we're through, and then he shoots her. What do we do about this? Again, be very careful with escorts. Yes, I just why I'm saying this is because I see it over and over again where we knew this guy's being stalked. I talked about parking lots being dangerous, and they go, oh, well, we'll let, Jimmy used to play defensive line for state back when he was in college. We'll have him walk her back and forth. Well, that's great for Jimmy, but, does he carry? When the guy, I don't care how big you are, if someone's pointing a .40 caliber at you, what are you going to do? So just be aware of that issue. Other things that you could be doing is have changing the parking spot, preferably to most secure location, closest to the entrance or underground parking or some sort of secured parking spot, or change their car as well, because the guy's going to be looking for her, a dark blue Volvo, car. So if she's using something else, he may not recognize it and choose not to go there. Oh, the one case, the North Carolina retirement home, the first thing he did is he found her car, shot out her windows with a shotgun, and then he went into the facility. A type of weapon, I don't know if this is interesting, maybe more interested to sort of response teams and law enforcement, but firearms by far the most common. And I think, and by the way, by assault rifle, I was really looking at just AR-15s, AK-47s, Tech-9s. I'm not just saying it's a gun that had a large clip capacity or looked like a military weapon. Oh, this is kind of interesting. I mentioned earlier a case where the guy hired some kids to slash tires in a parking lot. In some cases, they do use a hitman to do the act. And what I thought was, well, interesting is that when a hitman was used or another assailant, it wasn't the actual abuser committing the act, that is often a female was the quote-unquote abuser. So it might be a woman's having an affair with another man, and then that man decides to kill the husband just to get the life insurance or whatever. But most of the cases are they're direct. They commit the assault themselves. Second very important thing that I want to talk about is suicide, or what happens afterwards. Very large percentage of these individuals attempt suicide, commit suicide, or excuse the phrase suicide by cop. Affiliated with this issue is the number of folks who turn themselves in. And I mean literally they called the police, put their gun down, or I'm not kidding, drove to the police department and turned themselves in right after the shootings. Over and over again, we see these perpetrators not trying to hide their identity or escape. I think maybe a handful of cases where the guy, had an alias and had a ski mask and drove off, had tickets to Canada with a fake passport, that kind of situation. Most of the time, they don't have a plan beyond the murder. What does this mean? Cameras don't do jack. I was doing a security assessment, and we knew about this issue, and they'd said, well, we're going to put up cameras around the parking lot. And I'm like, unless it's actively monitored and you're using that to say, oh, here comes the car, all it does is capture it. The individuals do not care about being caught. So I just want to emphasize that issue. Video cameras do have a lot to do in terms of preventing crime, type 1 workplace violence, and stopping crime. But in this situation, I have low, I don't think they do much. Oh, okay, so what else are we going to do to secure the workplace? I just want to emphasize a few points. I'm repeating myself here. Monitoring devices are great if they're actively monitored. Be aware of the beginning and the end of the shift as a concern. Other things I want to do is please be aware that often it's just the targeted victim, the abusee, the abused victim who's the assailant. You just have to be aware of, like, other people could be injured, especially if they're brought to the attention to the abuser by their support for the victim. Background checks are important, but they may not show the full picture. And if you do get a restraining order, please be aware that that it by no means, well, I just have to repeat this, many of you on the call know this, but it's by far a definite prevention tool. It works for people that works against. Those who have a disregard or plan to kill themselves, they're not worried about the restraining order. Now, there's legal protections you can take. And by the way, restraining orders can be called many different things: order for protection, domestic violence restraining orders. In some states, it's possible to get a workplace restraining order. That's a tool that could be considered. I want to mention that the employer could get could press charges as well, such as trespassing or damage to property. If they're calling and harassing, in the other webinars I demonstrated how frequently that occurs, that we could, they're calling your phone, so you're the victim in that crime, so you could charge telephone harassment. Now this is a minor misdemeanor, it's a very low charge, but there's protections around the fact that you just got the charges. Now whether that could instigate or make it worse by pressing charges against them, I think that's another subject. One factor we have to look at is you're creating a paper trail. Should there be an incident afterwards, you want to demonstrate, hey, we got a restraining order, we charged him when he committed the crime, and you're showing some good faith efforts. So that's sort of like demonstrating that you were not negligent in addressing the situation. If you don't do any of these things, document why you did not as a protection. Again, it sounds like legal advice. Talk to your own legal counsel for handling these cases. Oh, here's the point. With now, I'm in Alabama now, but there's no workplace restraining orders, but they're pretty common in other states. I don't know, maybe there's a couple dozen of states that have workplace restraining orders. Just be aware that often the best person to testify or support the need for the restraining order is the victim themselves. I just would refrain from requiring them to testify. Don't make them do it, because again, you want to maintain that open relationship and you really want to avoid the sense of blame with these issues. I just want to throw in a couple things. Are you now getting into the blame game? If you're putting the charges against them, maybe they'll start blaming you. I don't think that's true, but we want to look at the bigger picture about their character, how they've handled things before as well. And then I mentioned this before about if they're effective. Sometimes they are, but there's real value in them. Oh, by the way, going back to personal restraining orders, that there's federal law stating that if someone has a restraining order against them, that they cannot possess a firearm. So depending upon the state or the county or the judge, it may be that you have officers going to that home and removing the firearms from that individual. Now we could argue about how easy it is to get another firearm, but the fact that you took away their guns does limit their ability to carry out a shooting. Okay, what else can we do for protecting the workplace? One of my favorites, always good ones, is talk to law enforcement. Of course, early on, they can help you with security planning, do the threat assessments, they could do site evaluations, and you could also simply ask them. I talked about the parking lot in the beginning of the shift as being a danger point. If you have a relationship with your community resource officer, see if they could come around and just swing around in the parking lot. I'm going to talk about off-duty officers as a separate issue, but having your officer just around there at the beginning of the shift, during those times, end of shift, that could be a deterrent. If the guy pulls up and sees a squad car in the parking lot, there's a good chance he may turn around and decide against. You could get information about the individual, such as their picture or the description of their vehicle. But again, this comes into balance with the confidentiality needs of the victim. Just be aware when you put up all these flyers around the campus, that's good. People are going to be like, hey, isn't that Jenny's husband? Be aware of the confidentiality issues. And then there are sort of CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design initiatives, such as, better lighting, barriers, mirrors, dogs, access control. It's a much bigger subject that I don't think I can get into right now, but there are investments that you can do to secure your facility. Let's talk about a few more ideas. One is if the abuser is in jail for, again, that minor charge, you could sign up for an automatic victim notification system. Often it's called VINE, V-I-N-E, where you could be notified the minute that they're released from jail, make bond, escape, whatever. Because the guy says, hey, I'm going to kill you. You put him in jail. His friends raise enough money to get him out. The minute he gets out, he's coming looking for you, so you could be notified through an automatic phone call when they're out. Again, depending upon the nature of the facility, retail and service establishments are a little tough for this, but factories are easy. Lock down the facility. Of course, you want to make sure that you have easy egress for fire code regulations, but secure the facility. Access controls is vital. Two very basic things you could do. Well, there's an expense to them, but hiring off-duty officers is a good measure. It varies. I've heard anywhere from $20 an hour to $40 an hour, depending upon what city you live in. They often come with their patrol car. It's not just that they have a gun. The fact that they have a radio and the power of arrest is huge, and just their whole presence and also their experience in handling these cases. So there's real advantage. A very expensive option, or it could be expensive, is hiring a security firm. They're professionals. Again, I talked about ATAP and ASIS as sources for finding support. One thing that they can do, and this is very effective, I've seen this for executive level protection, is that they would put a tail or private investigator following the abuser. And believe me, once that's done, then that's maybe where it's not guaranteed, but you've got a 24-hour notice of what's going on with that individual. And I'm not even going to touch on things like putting GPS trackers on their cars and stuff like that. But you know that they're doing that for their victims, so just be aware of that. So hiring security firms is an option. Now, I talked about the importance of having a response plan. I believe strongly that if you've identified this as a high-risk thing, go ahead and call law enforcement. I just read this report saying that law enforcement will take about 3 minutes on average responding to an active shooter situation, but these incidents can easily be over in 30 seconds. I know 30 seconds sounds like a long time, but golly, if I had more time, I'd pause and make us all wait out 30 seconds. You can realize how long that space of time is. But the point is, I'm not a fan of front desk calling the manager talking to security, or the safety manager, and the safety manager decides whether to call law enforcement. You just killed 7 minutes right there, or 3 minutes. Let's get the blue light screaming in your direction as soon as possible. If nothing happens, awesome. Nothing happened. Other things you can do is you can read here is locking down the facility. You have a way of securing the building, and maybe you've got a safe room. I don't think I have I guess I've got a pre-designed safe location. They're after the victims of abuse, so find a way to notify them so they're aware of the threat, and then whatever the plan is, they run or they go and hide, whatever the case may be. Now, there's things that we can do to secure that victim directly. One thing is it's thinking beyond the workplace and think about their home, their school, their kids' school, all of that. That's a huge subject in itself, and I want to emphasize working with your local domestic violence agency, and you could find out who yours are, just Google it or call this number. And then this organization will also help you develop security safety planning as well. So it's broadly not just the workplace, but everywhere in the victim's life. But regarding things about the workplace is think about where they're located. Again, is it the receptionist at the front desk? I did one case where the lady was, those little parking lots where you got the toll booth kiosk with little, arm that goes up and down and you pay, for the parking. Well, that was her job in that tiny little 3x6 glass box out in the middle of a parking lot. Can you imagine how incredibly vulnerable she is out there? So obviously that's sort of a no-brainer about choosing another location for her. Often that they're harassed and threatened, but that's bad, but it's also good because that's evidence. So if you can maintain their voicemail or their email and collect those things, that's really important. But of course, you want to provide them a different number. Maybe it can be screened, so it doesn't go directly to them, but it filters through somebody else. Another idea is you can get a code word for them. Often they may be kidnapped before they get to work, and they say, hey, let me call in sick, so they're not worried, and they could drop the code word with their manager so they know they're in trouble. Many of these domestic violence agencies provide free phones. If the victims do not have a phone, they could get a free phone through Verizon's Hopeline project to call the police or call the DA's the prosecutor's office or the victim services office. Now, the final thing I want to make is if you do the risk assessment, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm terrified. This is really a scary situation. You may choose to remove them from the workplace, remove the victims. Could they work from home? Could they work at another location? Do they take time off? It could be that they could get FMLA due to their injuries, so they can get time off without pay. The point is, if it is a real heavy risk situation, it may be that you determine that for a while you want them in a safe location. This does not mean firing them. I would just want to emphasize again that in the California Catholic school, they said, hey, we got children, we're really concerned, we think this guy's really dangerous, we got to let you go. And again, I don't know the full story. I'm just suggesting this. I'm not saying, I'm not personally involved in the case, but the Catholic Church is a pretty extensive organization. It's pretty big. So my question was, they couldn't find her another job in another city if she was willing to move. My point that I want to emphasize here, if you just fire victims, what that does is, I'm not trying to say right or wrong, but what it does is it discourages disclosure in future cases, and that's the danger. Purely from a tactical security standpoint, firing victims is going to limit your awareness of your pending threats. Golly, how are we for time? Are we good? I don't have a clock handy. I just want to say thanks so much. I went over a lot. I hope this is helpful. You all will get a copy of the program afterwards. Gee, I haven't seen any questions. I hope that doesn't mean that you all are playing solitaire or reading your email, but that I've just covered everything so well that you didn't have any questions. I'm going to be doing quite a few number of other webinars coming up. In fact, regarding the naval yard shooting, I'm going to be hosting probably another review, more not of a webinar, but more of an open discussion with other professionals, and you're welcome to join me there. The two things this is brought to you for free, and the reason we're able to do that is we have two products that help us maintain the ability to do this work for free. We have the e-panic button. Try to imagine if you do have a stalked victim, you could have the receptionist have a little button that they could or click their keyboard, and then the victim could get a pop-up alert, a text, and an email. Security could get a pop-up alert and a text, and management could be sent an email, all just by clicking a button. And you can even create a special button because it's entirely customizable. Let's say the guy's name is Johnny. Well, you can create a Johnny button, so it's not like, oh, we have a security situation. We know, hey, Johnny's here. What's our action plan? Boom, boom, boom. All these people get emails, text messages, and stuff like that. The other thing I want to point to you is I just launched this program called the Threat Assessment Tool that you're welcome to try out and as well. So I've got this new thing. I just launched it yesterday, so you're welcome to check it out if you like. So how are we? Oh, we're 10 minutes over. Darn. Okay. Thank you so much. I think we're good. I really appreciate everyone's time. If you ever want to do a webinar with me, contact me. Any questions, you know where to reach me. And I just appreciate your time today. Let's all stay safe. Let's stop these things from happening again because they can be prevented if we all work together. All right, everyone. I sure appreciate everyone's attention. And if I can help with anything, just reach out. Stay safe. Bye-bye.